shattered glass. The scent of bleach burned my nostrils as I scrubbed harder at the stubborn wine stain on the pristine white tablecloth. My fingertips were raw, cracked from chemicals and the relentless 12-hour shifts at La Stella, the most exclusive Italian restaurant in the city. A place where a single meal cost more than my weekly paycheck, where people like me were meant to be invisible. Maya. Table 7 needs resetting. The Cardano party will be here in 20 minutes. Marco, the floor manager, barely glanced at me as he passed, his voice clipped with the thinly veiled disdain he reserved for the cleaning staff. I nodded silently, my shoulders aching as I wrung out the cloth. The late October rain drummed against the tall windows, casting rippling shadows across the polished marble floors. Outside, the city lights blurred into watercolor smears of gold and silver, so different from the harsh fluorescent bulbs of my cramped apartment in the East District, where my twin daughters would be waiting. Emma and Lily, my 5-year-old miracles. The thought of their faces, identical button noses and mismatched socks, was the only thing keeping me upright. That, and the desperate need for this job after being laid off from the hospital where I'd worked as a nursing assistant for 6 years. One corporate merger, and suddenly single mothers with no college degree were redundant. I glanced at my watch. 9:17 p.m. Mrs. Patel from next door would need to leave by 10:30. The twins would be asleep, but I still had 3 more hours on my shift, and the twins' medicine wasn't going to pay for itself. The front door swung open, bringing with it a gust of cold air and the low rumble of expensive cars pulling up to the curb. I quickly gathered my cleaning supplies, making myself scarce as the Cardano party arrived. I'd learned early on that wealthy patrons preferred their service staff to be like ghosts, present when needed, invisible otherwise. I was halfway to the supply closet when I felt it. The strange electric charge that suddenly filled the room, the steady hum of conversation faltered. Even Marco, perpetually unimpressed, straightened his spine and smoothed down his already immaculate jacket. He had arrived. I didn't need to turn around to know who had entered. Everyone knew who Alessio Vitrelli was, even those of us who lived in a world far removed from his. Owner of half the city's high-rises, rumored kingpin of the Italian syndicate that controlled everything from luxury imports to the city's judges. I'd seen his face in newspapers, always in the society pages, never the crime section, though whispers of his true business followed him like shadows. Curiosity got the better of me. I risked a glance over my shoulder, just a quick peek. My breath caught in my throat. The photographs hadn't done him justice. Tall and broad-shouldered in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my yearly rent, Alessio Vitrelli commanded the space with a presence that seemed to bend the very air around him. His dark hair was swept back from a face that could have been carved from marble, all sharp angles and cold perfection. But it was his eyes that held me frozen, storm gray and penetrating, as if he could see through walls, through flesh, through lies. He wasn't alone. 2 men flanked him like sentinels, their stances casual but their eyes constantly scanning the room. Bodyguards, obviously. A 3rd man leaned in to whisper something in his ear, and Vitrelli nodded slightly, his expression unreadable. I realized I'd been staring too long when Marco appeared at my elbow, his fingers digging painfully into my arm. "What are you doing?" he hissed. "Get back to work." I mumbled an apology and hurried away, my cheeks burning with embarrassment. The supply closet offered a momentary sanctuary, and I leaned against the shelves, willing my heart to stop racing. Why was I so affected? He was just a man. A dangerous, powerful man who could probably buy and sell my entire apartment building without blinking, but still just a man. When I emerged, the restaurant had shifted into a higher gear. Waiters glided across the floor with practiced precision. The sommelier was opening bottles worth more than my monthly salary, and Vitrelli's party had been seated at the private alcove in the back, the most exclusive table naturally. I kept my head down, focusing on my tasks. There was a broken glass in the women's restroom that needed cleaning, Marco informed me curtly. As I knelt on the cold tile floor, carefully picking up the shattered pieces, I tried not to think about the twins' coughs that had been getting worse, or the eviction notice taped to our door this morning. 3rd one this year. "Mommy, why do we have to be quiet when the landlord knocks?" Emma had asked last week, her little face scrunched in confusion. I'd pulled her close, breathing in the scent of the dollar store shampoo that never quite got her curls untangled. "It's just a game we play, sweetie," I'd whispered, hating the lie. but hating the fear in her eyes more. A shard of glass sliced into my finger, jolting me back to the present. I bit back a cry as blood welled from the cut. Perfect. Just perfect. I wrapped my finger in a paper towel and finished cleaning up the glass, then slipped out to find a bandage from the first aid kit in the kitchen. The head chef glared as I rummaged through the supplies, but I'd grown accustomed to being treated like an inconvenience. The rest of the night blurred into a montage of spills and stains and aching feet. I was emptying a trash bin near the bar when I heard Marco's panicked voice. "What do you mean we're out of the 82 Brunello? Mr. Vitrelli specifically requested it." The sommelier spread his hands helplessly. "The last bottle was served to the ambassador last week. We have the 86. No. Marco ran a hand through his hair. "You don't substitute what Mr. Vitrelli asks for. Find it. Call other restaurants if you have to. I shouldn't have been listening. Should have kept my head down, stayed invisible." But the twins' faces flashed in my mind. Lily's wheezing that had worsened this morning, the prescription I couldn't afford to fill yet. "Excuse me," I said quietly, before I could think better of it. "I think there's another bottle." Both men turned to stare at me as if a mop had suddenly started speaking. "During inventory last week, I saw a bottle of 82 Brunello that had fallen behind the rack in the private cellar," I continued, my voice growing smaller under their incredulous gazes. "I reported it to Antonio, but he was busy with the delivery." The sommelier's eyes widened. "Show me," he demanded. 5 minutes later, I was vindicated as he carefully extracted the dusty bottle from its hiding place. "This is it," he confirmed, his earlier disdain replaced by something almost like respect. "How did you even notice this?" I shrugged. "I notice things. It's part of cleaning thoroughly. What I didn't say was that I'd spent 6 years in a hospital paying attention to details, because sometimes those details meant life or death." Marco snatched the bottle. "Get back to work," he ordered, but there was less bite in his tone than usual. I retreated to the main floor, resuming my invisible rounds. The restaurant had emptied somewhat, but Vitrelli's party remained, their low conversation occasionally punctuated by laughter. I kept my distance, focusing on the far side of the dining room. It was nearly midnight when disaster struck. I was clearing empty glasses from a recently vacated table when a drunken patron stood up abruptly, bumping into me. The tray tilted, and a half-full champagne flute tipped over the edge, splashing its contents directly onto the plush cream carpet. "Watch it," the man snapped, as if I had been the one to collide with him. "I'm so sorry, sir," I murmured, already dropping to my knees to blot the stain before it set. Marco materialized beside me, all cutting smiles for the patron and venomous glares for me. "Please forgive our clumsy staff," he simpered. Then, under his breath to me, "Clean it properly. If that stain sets, it's coming out of your pay." My stomach clenched. I couldn't afford another deduction. Not with Lily's medication and the rent already overdue. I hurried to get the specialized cleaning solution, then returned to scrub at the stubborn stain. The carpet was expensive, designed to repel liquids, but champagne was tricky, all that sugar. I worked methodically, aware of Marco watching me like a hawk from across the room. So focused was I on the task that I didn't notice the presence behind me until a shadow fell across the carpet. A pair of immaculately polished Italian leather shoes appeared at the edge of my vision. My gaze traveled upward, past the perfectly tailored trousers, the jacket that hung with the ease only true craftsmanship could achieve, to find myself looking directly into the storm-gray eyes of Alessio Vitrelli. This close, I could smell his cologne, something earthy and expensive, like aged wood and rare spices. My heart hammered against my ribs as he regarded me with cool interest, as one might observe an unusual insect. "You found my wine," he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through my bones. Not a question, but a statement. I swallowed hard. "I just remembered seeing it, sir." Something flickered in those gray depths. Amusement, perhaps. "Observant," he noted. "A valuable quality." Before I could respond, one of his bodyguards approached, leaning in to murmur something in his ear. Vitrelli's expression hardened imperceptibly, and he gave a curt nod. "We're leaving," he announced to no one in particular, though the staff seemed to materialize instantly to assist with coats and doors. I remained frozen on my knees, feeling as if I'd just had a close encounter with something dangerous and beautiful, like watching a jaguar from too small a distance. Only when he had disappeared through the front door, his entourage trailing behind him, did I remember to breathe. Marco appeared beside me, his face tight with an emotion I couldn't quite read. "Finish up and help with closing," he ordered, then hesitated. "Mr. Vitrelli doesn't usually notice the staff," he added, a question lurking beneath the statement. I shrugged, keeping my eyes on the carpet. I just got lucky with the wine, but as I worked through the final hour of my shift, wiping down tables and folding napkins with mechanical precision, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted tonight, some invisible thread of fate plucked by careless fingers. It was ridiculous, of course. Men like Alessio Vitrelli existed in a different stratosphere from women like me. Our worlds had brushed against each other for the briefest moment, and now they would continue on their separate orbits, never to intersect again. How terribly, catastrophically wrong I was. Borrowed warmth. The rain had transformed into a deluge by the time my shift ended. Water sluiced down the restaurant's elegant awning and sheets as I huddled just inside the doorway, clutching my thin jacket around me. The last bus to my neighborhood had departed 20 minutes ago, and the thought of the long walk home in this weather made my already aching body protest. "You need cab fare?" asked Jenna, one of the waitresses, as she tugged on her raincoat. I shook my head, forcing a smile. "I'm fine. My apartment's not far." The lie came easily after years of practice. Pride was sometimes the only thing I owned that nobody could take from me. "Suit yourself." She shrugged, dashing out into the rain toward a waiting rideshare. I took a deep breath and stepped out from under the shelter of the awning. The cold water immediately penetrated my jacket, plastering my hair to my face and sending shivers down my spine. Head down, I began the long trek home, mentally calculating how many hours of sleep I could get before needing to wake the twins for their breakfast. 3 blocks from the restaurant, my phone buzzed. Mrs. Patel. "Maya? The little one's cough is worse," she said without preamble, her voice tight with concern. "She's having trouble breathing. I was going to call an ambulance, but I know how you feel about the expense." My heart dropped like a stone. "I'm on my way," I said, already breaking into a run, heedless of the rain soaking me to the skin. Lily had been born with asthma, her lungs just a little weaker than her sister's. Usually, her inhaler was enough to manage it, but the change in seasons always made it worse, and the prescription for her stronger medication was sitting unfilled at the pharmacy, because I'd had to choose between that and rent this month. I was so focused on getting home that I didn't notice the sleek black car gliding alongside me until it honked softly. I jumped, instinctively stepping away from the curb as the rear window rolled down. "You'll catch pneumonia," said a now familiar voice, deep and commanding. Alessio Vitrelli sat in the back seat, regarding me with those penetrating gray eyes. Up close, I could see flecks of silver in them, like metal shavings caught in storm clouds. "I'm fine," I said automatically, wrapping my arms tighter around myself as another violent shiver ran through me. His eyebrow arched slightly. "Clearly." The word dripped with sarcasm. "Get in." It wasn't a request, but my daughter was wheezing, possibly needing emergency care, and I didn't have time for whatever this was. "I appreciate the offer, but I need to get home to my daughters. One of them is sick." My voice cracked on the last word, betraying my panic. Something shifted in his expression, a barely perceptible softening. "Address?" he asked simply. I hesitated. Every instinct warned against telling this dangerous man where my children slept, but Lily's face floated before me, her lips tinged blue during her last bad attack, and practicality overrode caution. I rattled off my address in the East District, bracing for the flicker of disdain that usually crossed people's faces when they realized I lived in the city's poorest neighborhood. Instead, Vitrelli merely nodded and pushed the door open wider. "That's on our way. Get in." The interior of the car was warm and smelled of leather and that same woody cologne. A privacy screen separated us from the driver. The other bodyguard, the one who'd whispered in Vitrelli's ear at the restaurant, sat in the front passenger seat, his broad shoulders visible through the tinted partition. I perched on the edge of the seat, hyper-aware of the water dripping from my clothes, onto what was undoubtedly handcrafted Italian leather. "Thank you," I murmured, keeping my eyes fixed on my trembling hands. "You're the wine girl," he said after a moment of silence, his voice contemplative. Despite everything, I almost smiled. "Is that my new title?" The corner of his mouth twitched. "You have a name, I assume." "Maya. Maya Reeves." He nodded, as if filing this information away. "Your daughter, what's wrong with her?" "Asthma. She's 5. I didn't know why I was telling him this. Perhaps it was the strange intimacy of the car, cocooned against the storm outside. Or perhaps it was simply that no one had asked me a direct question about my children in longer than I could remember. "Twins, you said, identical?" I blinked in surprise. "Yes. How did you—" "You mentioned daughters, plural, but referenced only one age." He shrugged, as if this deduction was obvious. "The sick one. What treatment does she need?" I twisted my hands in my lap. "Her inhaler isn't working well enough. She needs the stronger prescription, but I haven't been able to—" I trailed off, unwilling to admit my financial situation to this man who probably spent more on a single meal than I earned in a month, but he seemed to understand anyway. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He pressed a button on his armrest. "Antonio, stop at the 24-hour pharmacy on 7th. The car changed direction smoothly. I stared at him, confused. "What are you doing?" "Solving a problem." His tone made it clear he wasn't accustomed to explaining himself. 20 minutes later, we pulled up outside my apartment building, a crumbling 5-story walk-up with graffiti-covered walls and a security door that hadn't locked properly since I moved in 3 years ago. The rain had eased to a steady drizzle, but rivers still ran along the gutters, carrying cigarette butts and candy wrappers toward clogged storm drains. In my lap was a bag containing not only Lily's prescription, filled without my insurance card or even a phone call to the doctor, just a few quiet words from Vitrelli to the pharmacist, but also a nebulizer machine and several additional medications the pharmacist had recommended. "I can't accept this," I'd protested in the store. "I can't pay you back." Vitrelli had simply walked away mid-sentence, leaving me clutching the bag as he completed whatever transaction had occurred with the wide-eyed pharmacist. Now, faced with the reality of my life, the stark contrast between his world and mine laid bare. Shame burned in my cheeks. "Thank you for the ride, and for this." I clutched the pharmacy bag like a lifeline. "I should go check on Lily." I reached for the door handle, but his voice stopped me. "Your building has no security." It wasn't a question. I sighed. "The landlord keeps promising to fix the door." His expression darkened. "And your apartment?" "3rd floor." "Look, I really appreciate everything, but I need to— I'm coming up." Again, not a request. Panic fluttered in my chest. "That's really not necessary. It wasn't an offer, Maya." My name in his mouth sounded different somehow, weighted with an authority that brooked no argument. Before I could protest further, he was out of the car, holding the door open for me. Rain beaded on his expensive wool coat, but he seemed indifferent to it. The bodyguard from the front seat materialized beside him, scanning the street with practiced efficiency. "Domenico stays with the car," Vitrelli explained, nodding toward the driver. "Stefano comes with us." I wanted to argue, to tell this presumptuous man that he couldn't just insert himself into my life, but Lily's wheezing cough echoed in my memory, and I swallowed my pride. If nothing else, Stefano looked strong enough to carry her to the car if we needed to go to the hospital. The stairwell smelled of damp concrete and someone's overcooked cabbage. A flickering fluorescent light cast sickly shadows as we climbed, making me acutely aware of every piece of peeling paint, every cracked tile. I'd long since stopped noticing these things, but seeing my daily environment through a stranger's eyes, especially one accustomed to luxury, made my throat tight with humiliation. Mrs. Patel's door opened before we reached the 3rd floor. She poked her head out, her silver-streaked hair in a hasty bun, concern etched on her kind face. "Maya, thank goodness. She's been asking for you." Her eyes widened as she registered my companions. "Oh. It's okay, Mrs. Patel. This is—" I faltered, unsure how to introduce Alessio Vitrelli. My boss? My benefactor? The Mafia kingpin who bought my daughter's medicine? "A friend," he supplied smoothly, his voice warmer than I'd heard it before. He extended his hand to my neighbor, Alessio. "Thank you for looking after Maya's daughters." Mrs. Patel blushed like a schoolgirl as she shook his hand. Of course, of course. Such sweet girls. I've moved them to your apartment, Maya." Lily seemed more comfortable in her own bed. I thanked her profusely, promising to bring her famous coconut cookies from the bakery near the restaurant, then hurried the remaining few steps to my door. The lock stuck, as it always did, requiring a specific jiggle and lift maneuver that I performed automatically. My apartment was small,